bougie?
Fancy upstate New York.
Man.
Doing bougie.
The rest of us go doggy. We go doggy wild. We go falcony. Time to run the no huddle.
What does that mean?
Big matchup in the AFC, Sonny.
No one knows. Let's just keep moving.
You guys have lost me. Totally lost.
Welcome to the show, Broussard. Hey, 3-1 Browns, 3-1 Chargers, Baker versus Herbert. It was reported yesterday Baker Mayfield's been playing through a partially torn labrum in his left shoulder. Baker said the injury should not be affecting his throws. You wonder, though, after one of his worst games ever last week. Nick, what would a win over the Chargers mean for Baker and the Browns?
Oh, it'd be massive, especially when you look at it. Do yourself a favor, especially if you're considering gambling on this game. Just check out the Browns injury report this week. It's too long to list the number of guys who have not practiced yet this week and did not practice yesterday. So the Browns are going to be shorthanded, plus Baker's injured, plus the Chargers have a very strong argument that they are the second best team in the AFC. I happen to think the Chargers and Browns are the second and third best teams in the conference right now. I know the whole world's in love with the Bills. That'll end in about 70 hours. But for the time being, everyone loves the Bills. So this would be a massive win for Baker. And he's in an odd spot. Like, it's not even a discussion right now. And we are 1 year into Justin Herbert's career. Which team has the better quarterback, Chargers or Browns? It's unanimous consent that the Chargers have the better quarterback. And for the Chargers, on the other side of things, when they looked at their opening schedule, and it's like, we've got the Chiefs, then the Raiders, then Cleveland, and then Baltimore next week, by the way. If they can start that 4-game stretch 3-0, you have to start taking them seriously as far as could they be a year or two ahead of schedule. This is a game, Broussard, I believe that even though Baker played poorly last week, style points don't matter for the Browns. If they win and get to 4-1 with the schedule they've had, by any means necessary, they will take it. Obviously, Baker would like to play well, and I think given the injuries, he's going to have to play well for them to beat the Chargers. It would be a massive victory for them, but I think they're in a really rough spot given all their injuries.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but I would say this. The Chargers have a heck of an argument that they're the best team in the AFC, right? They beat Kansas City. They beat Las Vegas. They could very easily be 4-0. They would have beat Dallas, but they took away their own 2 touchdowns of their own with penalties. So they're playing great football. So, yeah, if the Browns beat them, as you said, with all the injuries, that is huge. And I do agree with you. Whether Baker plays well or not, it's impressive. Imagine if they beat the Chargers with Baker struggling. And the Chargers haven't been great against the run. We know that's a strength of the Browns, so that's something on their side, a check mark that if they should be able to run the ball on Sunday. But Baker, you need him to start playing well. And really, you need it for this reason, Nick. He needs to show that he can perform well with his most talented wide receiver on the field. That's Odell Beckham Jr. And I don't put any of this on Odell, really. But I don't. You see it right there. We know last year that Baker played much better once Odell went down and got injured. This year he was completing 81% of his passes in the first 2 games without Odell. Odell comes back. Now he's completing 53%. I don't put this on Odell, but does he intimidate Baker? Or does Baker feel like I have to get him the football instead of just going through his normal progressions and finding the open receiver? That is now becoming a question mark in Cleveland. So Baker's got to put that notion to rest. But again, even if he doesn't play well and they win, it's huge for the Browns, Wilds.
All right, I want to see Baker have a big game because you know what gets my antennas up? Torn labrums, partially or fully. And here's why. I'll give you a specific little story. When I was doing the jump with my old buddy Tracy McGrady, Tracy went on there. He was talking about, I think, Paul George struggling. And Tracy just out of the blue didn't tell anybody. He's like, I think he's got a torn labrum. Where I was like, oh, dude, you kind of can't do that. Can't just like diagnose guys. You're not a doctor. And he had a torn labrum. And Tracy talked about his torn labrum and how brutal it was. So the news came out that Baker has a partially torn labrum. I was like, okay, not quite sure where that is in your body. I couldn't really point to it or draw it. So I guess that'll be all right if it's only partially torn. I just am very nervous about this, and everybody seems to be saying it's not a big deal. The fact that it's out and he's struggling is a bigger deal for me than everybody else. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to be wrong. Maybe he can play through it the whole season, but my level of Baker alert went from here to up here because of that partially torn labrum. I'm a labrum guy. Everybody knows it.
Fair.
I actually like how cautious you are with everybody in their health status.
That's fair.
It's tough Thursday night football. Matt Stafford and the Rams offense came alive in the second half last night against Seattle. Scored 23 after the break to come back and beat the Seahawks. They now improved to 4-1, piling up 476 yards of total offense in the process. Hey, Broussard, were you impressed by Matt Stafford last night?
In the second half, yes. He looked good after halftime. Threw for 234 yards after intermission. Completed 6 of his 7 passes for 20 yards or more after intermission. So he looked good in the second half, 1 touchdown as well. First half, not impressed at all. He was missing guys that were wide open. He had 1 interception. They only managed 7 points in the first half against the Seattle defense that, as we said, hasn't been great. So, look, here are 2 things we have to keep in mind with Matt Stafford. The bar is set extremely high for him, okay? He was traded for Jared Goff, 2 first-round picks, and a 3rd-round pick, all right? So, and you went to a team that, with Goff, had made it to a Super Bowl and was a perennial contender. So being a perennial contender again, being 4-1, it's nice, but that's not what you're there for. He has to win a Super Bowl within the next 2 or 3 years for this trade to be justified. And he hasn't looked that good. A lot of people thought he'd be the MVP this year. He's playing well, he's playing fine, but he hasn't looked like an MVP. And then the second thing to keep in mind with Matt Stafford is that he's not used to playing these types of games. Okay, in Detroit, he was in hiding. I know they made the playoffs a few times, but for the most part, he wasn't playing significant games. He wasn't under this type of scrutiny. He wasn't playing where every possession counted and mattered. All right, he wasn't in these big primetime moments. And so how is he responding to that? That's what you have to keep in mind when you're looking at Matt Stafford. So first 3 weeks look great. Nick, last 2 weeks been good,
yeah.
But has he been good enough to justify that trade? I'm not so sure.
Well, I think the trade almost justifies itself because the Rams now have a legitimate NFL starting quarterback. I don't think they have to win a Super Bowl to justify it. Getting off Goff was valuable in and of itself, and I think Stafford's clearly better. However, otherwise, I agree with a lot of what you said. And the pick he threw was terrible. It took points off the board. It was to no one except for his former teammate from Detroit, Quandre Diggs. That was an awful play. But where I will give the Rams credit is they played poorly last week. They played poorly in the first half this week, only scoring 3 points against that miserable Seattle defense. And then they rallied on the road in a tough environment. And so I think you have to give them credit for that and being able to sustain the way they did. I also think, Wilds, the bigger story with the Rams this year, even if it doesn't show up in the raw points from last night, is that defense is nowhere close to the level it was last season. That was their biggest strength last year by far. And so I thought Stafford was mediocre last night, but they're 4-1. You go to Seattle, you get a win I didn't think you were going to get. It was important for them to bounce back in the second half the way they did. But one of 2 things is going to have to happen. Either the defense is going to have to get closer to where it was last year, or Stafford's going to have to be more consistent.
Absolutely.
Because you can't be, he was, like Broussard said, he was missing guys high and then the terrible pick early. He rallied, so I'll give him credit. But if they're going to be the favorites in the NFC, it's going to have to come from one of those 2 places.
Yep. So he had an awful pick in the end zone. He also, the throw that he had, the completion, which is the highlight of the game to Deshaun Jackson, that should have been an interception. So after this segment, I'm going to make a quick trip to Elias, and I'm going to change the statistics. This should have been picked off by Jamal Adams. He has no idea where he is. And on the flip side, Geno Smith should have kept that drive going. It wasn't his fault. So Geno Smith, your interception, I'm taking it from the Geno Smith column. I'm bringing it over to the Matthew Stafford column. You're clean. Ice in the veins. Great game.
By the way, listen, I'm looking at this schedule. Giants, Lions, Texans, next 3 games for the Rams. They could very easily